Hi everyone, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we are going to be discussing the innervation of the gastrointestinal system. In this video we'll be talking about the innervation of the gut. We will talk about the enteric plexus that directly serves the gut structures, and we'll talk about how it plugs into the rest of the peripheral and central nervous system through our sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons. And then we'll finish up by talking about some of the different effects sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation has on gut structures. Now, the first thing that we're going to do here is talk about the nerves that directly serve the gut structures. And any neuron that has a job supplying a gut structure is going to make up part of what we call the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is a lot less pretty than the somatic nervous system that serves our trunk and our limbs. So if you look up here on the diagram, you see these nice, long, singular blue spinal nerves coming off here. They come off in nice straight lines, and they tend to stay together as nice, solid nerves. But when we look down here in the gut, we see, and here too, we see this red squiggly stuff. This is representing the enteric nerves, and it's not that far off from reality. In the gut, we don't have nice solid nerves. We have a spiderwebby mess of neuron plexuses. Most of the time, these are going to jump on top of blood vessels, and they make like a net over the top of them to travel where they're going. So we're working with a slightly different structure to all of this. Now, the gut structures are internal organs, or viscera, so they're innervated by visceral neurons. And visceral neurons, just like somatic neurons, come in both motor and sensory varieties. So just to quickly review here with you, the peripheral nervous system has two major divisions. We've got the somatic system and the autonomic system. The somatic nervous system is for conscious functions. Usually these are affecting the trunk and the limbs. So its motor component innervates striated or skeletal muscle, and its sensory component carries back information about changes that affect the muscles, the tendons, the joints, and skin. The autonomic nervous system is for unconscious functions, and it innervates our visceral structures or organs. So these are smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glandular tissue. And I'm just going to make a quick note here that the visceral sensory system is separate from the autonomic system. It's its own thing. Autonomics just refers to the motor component. All right, and that motor component, remember, is going to get broken down into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system based on where they exit the central nervous system and then the effects that they have on viscera downstream. The sympathetic nervous system exits the central nervous system between the T1 and L2 spinal cord. So we've got that intermediolateral horn where it originates. And it's going to produce a flight or fight response. So it's going to get everything ready to burn some energy. The parasympathetic, so para meaning around, so we had our sympathetics that emerged here. Para, we have some starting from the brainstem above and the sacral spinal cord S2 to S4 below. Okay? Their effects on visceral structures very often are going to get summed up as rest and digest. The way I've always thought about this is that sympathetics get your body geared up to spend energy, either to fight or to get away. And sympathetics conserve energy and bring new energy into the body through digestion. One other major difference here between somatic and autonomic nerves is how many neurons work together in the peripheral nervous system to innervate a structure. So for somatic pathways, there's just a single neuron. It's just one straight shot out to whatever it's innervating. For autonomics, there are two neurons. So one of them is going to be rooted here in the central nervous system. That's going to be our preganglionic neuron. And that's going to send its axon out to synapse with a postganglionic buddy here. Okay? And it's that buddy then that ends up meeting the target structures directly. Now, when we get multi-step pathways like this, the soma, or the cell body, so the fat parts here, they don't just like to hang out all on their own. They like to cluster together. So clusters of cell bodies outside of the central nervous system are called ganglia, or a ganglion if there's just one of them. So we have sympathetic ganglia that form the chains that run alongside our vertebra, the paravertebral ganglion, and those help distribute the sympathetic fibers outside of that T1 to L2 region where they originate. Parasympathetic ganglia are a little bit different though. So in the body cavity, we don't really find big dissectable parasympathetic ganglia like we do for those sympathetic chains. Instead, what we see is that these GI organs, and all organs really, have tiny little parasympathetic ganglia built directly into their walls. So this first preganglionic parasympathetic neuron is really long, and it's going to travel all the way down via the vagus nerve or up from the sacrosplanchnic nerves all the way to the organ that it's targeting. It's going to synapse with its buddy right in the wall here, and then that one is really very short, and it just takes a little hop over to the cells that it's in charge of. All right, so this was a very quick and dirty review. If things aren't quite snapping back into place for you, I recommend you take a few minutes, go back to Dr. Sullivan's lectures for a refresh, because understanding autonomics is going to be key to understanding gut innervation here. All right, so with that in mind, let's walk through the sympathetic pathway to the gut. For our purposes, we're going to be starting off in the T1 to L2 spinal cord in the intermediolateral horn. The preganglionic axon is going to exit the spinal cord using the motor or ventral root of the spinal nerve. From the spinal nerve, it enters the sympathetic chain through that little white ramus communicans on-ramp, but it's not going to synapse there just yet. Instead, it's going to jump on one of the thoracic splanchnic nerves. So these little green things that you can see here, that is going to carry it down beyond the diaphragm and into the abdominal cavity. All right, once it's in the abdominal cavity, it finds its ganglion to synapse at. There are 3 big ganglia down in the abdomen, and they're all sitting right along the front of the abdominal aorta, so we call them pre-aortic ganglia. And they have clusters around our 3 big branches from our aorta here. So we're going to have celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric ganglia. From those ganglia, the postganglionic axon is going to travel with the arteries and their branches to get to their target organs. And this, of course, begs the question, how do you know which ganglion your preganglionic neuron is going to synapse in? Okay, so is that going to be celiac, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric? And the answer is pretty simple. I think you will like it very much. It is simply, once again, coming back to these embryological divisions of the gut for our answer. So any sympathetic pathway to a foregut organ is going to synapse in the celiac ganglion. For the midgut, they're going to synapse in the superior mesenteric, and for the hindgut, they'll synapse in the inferior mesenteric. So you can pick any GI organ here to practice. All right, so we got small intestine. Small intestine is midgut, so it's going to synapse in superior mesenteric. All right, descending colon, this is hindgut, so it's going to synapse in the inferior mesenteric. All right, so this is nice and organized. Once you get enough practice trying this out, it'll seem super simple. Okay, so we've got our pathway into the gut, and we have our postganglionic neurons following our arterial branches out to the organs. Once they reach those gut organs, they're going to enter into the walls and travel through them to get to the specific part of the organ that they act on. Now, GI organs typically do 2 things that need motor innervation. Number 1, they're going to move food through the alimentary canal. And number two, they're going to secrete some sort of substance to either break down or help move along the stuff that is digesting and moving through them, right? What that substance is can range from really caustic digestive juices to just mucus, depending on the organ. But they all create something. So some of these neurons coming into the enteric plexus will be heading to these smooth muscles to stimulate or inhibit peristalsis. So we've got our layers of muscles here that are going to contract to move food through. Or they might be targeting these little secretory glands down here as part of the mucosa, which will produce those juices, okay? And those will then travel down this little duct here right into the lumen of the GI tract. And depending entirely upon which one they're targeting, they're going to enter into one of two enteric plexuses. So the neurons that are heading for the smooth muscle are going to enter into the myenteric or Auerbach's plexus. So Auerbach's is once again an eponym. And this is located right in the muscularis or the muscle layer of the organ. You can see that right here in between the muscle fibers themselves. These nerves go ahead, head into the muscles, spread out, and do their jobs. Now their job, because we're talking about sympathetics, is actually to inhibit or to slow down peristalsis in this case. The neurons that are going for the mucosa then are going to burrow just a little bit deeper down into the wall into the submucosal layer, where they will form the submucosal plexus or Meissner's plexus. And the nerves here control, again, these mucus glands in the mucosa. And because they are sympathetic, again, and sympathetic tends to be a gut inhibitor, in this case, they would be telling these glands to slow down their secretion. All right, so that is the sympathetic pathway. Now let's do the parasympathetics. Parasympathetics have craniosacral outflow, so they can begin in two different places, depending on their targets. They can either leave the brainstem via the vagus nerve here and travel down, or they can leave the sacral spinal cord via pelvic splanchnic nerves and head up. Now, as it turns out, the division between cranial outflow and sacral outflow is also the division between the foregut and midgut and hindgut, okay? So the foregut and midgut will both receive preganglionic parasympathetic innervation from the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10. And the hindgut will receive it from the sacral spinal cord and those pelvic splanchnic nerves. So let's walk through both of these pathways. We'll start with the foregut and midgut. In this instance, the cell body or soma of our preganglionic neuron is hanging out in the brainstem. Its axon is going to travel out through the vagus nerve. It's going to travel inferiorly through the neck and through the thorax to enter into the abdomen, where it is going to join those preaortic plexuses that we saw before. So celiac, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric. Now we're not talking about just the ganglia here. So these nerves are not going to synapse in those ganglia. They're not going to synapse at all yet. But they do join in that spiderwebby plexus of nerves that travels over the top of the blood vessels to find their organs. And once it finally reaches its organ, it's going to synapse in one of those two plexuses that we just described in the walls of the organ, so myenteric or submucosal. And then the postganglionic buddy axon is going to travel through the wall of the organ to get to its target cells. Okay, once again, begging the question, how do you know which one of those ganglia it synapses in? And to answer that, you actually need to know which process you're innervating. So if you're innervating peristalsis, then it's going to synapse in the myenteric plexus or Auerbach's plexus. If you're innervating secretion, then it's going to head down to the submucosal plexus. If you're not sure, or if the question didn't specify, then it is perfectly acceptable to just say that it synapses in the enteric plexus. All right, and last but not least here, let's go through the pathway to the hindgut. So here, we're starting from the sacral spinal cord between levels S2 and S4 typically. The preganglionic axon exits the spinal cord using the motor route to enter the spinal nerves at S2 to S4. And then almost immediately it jumps back off that spinal nerve using a little branch called the pelvic splanchnic nerve. Those pelvic splanchnic nerves are going to carry the axon into the preaortic plexuses again, where they again will follow the blood vessels to their organs. And then they'll synapse in either the myenteric or submucosal ganglia. And the postganglionic axon travels through the wall of the organ to its target. And this time, you get to answer this question yourself. All right, so now we know how to get motor innervation to our gut via both sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. So let's just regroup for a moment here and review which division is going to do what. So which is going to increase gut motility? How about secretion? Take a second. I've touched on the answer here a little bit already, but I want you to really think this through here to understand what effects these nerves will have on the gut. We've got our sympathetic nervous system over here, which is famous for producing what we call a fight or flight response. Now I want you to answer a very serious question for me. Do you, my dear students, do you want your bowels moving while you're in the middle of a fight or while you're running for your life? I don't think you do. So while sympathetics are getting everything else excited in your body and ready to go, so they're increasing your heart rate, dilating bronchioles, they actually turn down your gut functions. They're gut inhibitors. Parasympathetics over here are the gut stimulators. It's right there in their little mnemonic, rest and digest. This is for both peristalsis and secretion. Parasympathetics are going to crank up everything that the gut does, and they're going to allow more blood to reach the tissues there for nutrient absorption. Okay, so we have bravely made our way through the motor innervation of the gut. Now let's talk a little bit about visceral sensation. So just as a reminder, visceral sensation is fundamentally different from somatic sensation. The sensations themselves are different. In the case of the GI tract here, hunger and thirst are especially important sensations, as are fullness or satiety and nausea. And not receiving enough oxygen or changes in blood pressure are also good things to be able to monitor through special sensation in general. Visceral pain, so specific type of sensation here, is also, it's caused by different things than somatic pain. It tends to be felt as more of a diffuse, kind of hard to define discomfort. So think of if you've ever had an upset stomach and you know something feels wrong and bad, but it's hard to get a lot more specific than that. Things that create this can be a number of different things, and they will all produce a similar pain. These can include distension or like stretching out of an organ, ischemia or not receiving enough blood, muscle spasm, or even a chemical injury. Things that don't cause visceral pain, these are things like crushing, cutting, impact. Those are what we typically associate with somatic pain. So those hurt the outside of your body, but don't typically cause a pain reaction internally. Visceral sensation is going to follow the same pathway as the autonomic nerves. So again, it's not part of the autonomic system, but because it is innervating these same structures, it kind of follows the same path. All right, same origin, same destination. It makes sense for them to follow a similar pathway. Which division it follows, though, is going to depend on whether we're talking about, or I'm sorry, not whether, where we are talking about. The division line here is called the pelvic pain line, and it's honestly the same as the inferior most limit of the peritoneal sac that you guys are going to be learning so much about in the next couple of videos here. The general rule is anything superior to this, so in the blue area here, is going to follow the sympathetics back up through the preaortic plexuses and the thoracic splanchnic nerves to get back to the spinal cord. Okay, so you can see that happening here. We've got a little spot on the uterus here that is going to follow sympathetics back up through those plexuses, back up through the sympathetic chain to get to the spinal cord. Below here in this green area, the visceral nerves are going to follow the parasympathetic pathway, okay? And we can see an example of this here. So now we are down in the superior vagina, and this is going to travel back following the parasympathetics through those pelvic splanchnic nerves back into our sacral spinal nerves and to the sacral spinal cord, okay? So just run it backwards. Now, I said before that visceral pain is often felt as kind of diffuse, hard to localize, hard to describe. But there are many occasions where visceral pain is felt in a very specific place on the somatic structures that make up part of the trunk or the limbs. So it's almost like the brain gets confused as to where the pain's coming from, and it projects it onto the body wall or the limbs. This is called referred pain, and it's not entirely clear why this phenomenon exists. It might be because the spinal levels that the visceral nerves synapse at, so all of those visceral sensory nerves, they overlap with regions on the spinal cord where the trunk and limb pain synapse in the spinal cord. So it's possible that having a similar synapse point there means that your central nervous system confuses where it's coming from. You can see an example of this over here on the right where we've got pain from the appendix here. And it's traveling back to the spinal cord here and synapsing at the same level as our periumbilical skin. So these are both taking the same pathway up here. And then the pain is felt as if it were coming from the skin, but some of these projections don't line up quite as neatly as this one does. So researchers are continuing to study it to find out what exactly causes this. What we can say for sure is that foregut organs tend to refer their pain to the epigastric region here, so above the gut. The teal, teal is foregut. Midgut organs tend to refer pain to the periumbilical region, and hindgut to the hypogastric region. And that is going to bring us to the end here. That was really a lot, so give yourself a pat on the back and take a small break to digest all of this, and I will see you in the next video.